This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
One of the key issues brought up by Mary Robinson, the high-profile UN Human Rights Commissioner, was the attacks against minorities. It's an issue that she brought up during a meeting with the Prime Minister and later with the Home Minister. She was also presented a report by the National Human Rights Commission on their own investigation into the attack against Graham Staines in Orissa. Ms. Robinson said she was satisfied with the steps taken by the NHRC and the government.
I have noted that it has been very strongly condemned by the statement of the President and of the Prime Minister, and that there is a commission of inquiry. So the issue is certainly being addressed.
The NHRC chairman blamed poor administration for the attacks and said the NHRC plans to open special cells in all troubled areas.
Our concern is that law enforcement has been weak in this country, but in this area it must be exemplary. There's no other way in which it should be looked upon as an affront on the Constitution of India and dealt with in the strictest possible terms.
Mrs. Robinson also attended a high-profile conference on democracy where she was a speaker along with Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. She talked of the need to link democracy and human rights.
If we look at the link between democracy and human rights, we can ask perhaps whether it is a marriage of love or one of reason. And my answer would be that it is necessarily both. It is of love because they cannot live without each other. And it is of reason because they need a conscious agreement about their relationship.
Amongst the speakers, Nobel laureate Amartya Sen reiterated his faith in the resilience of Indian democracy.
So we have to make sure that we practice democracy with the vigor that it requires, and even some of the problems that arise and that are attributed to democracy can be solved within democracy.
Mary Robinson says that in her time as UN Human Rights Commissioner, she wants to make changes in the human rights debate, ranging from civil and political rights to social and economic rights. NDTV Bureau, Star News.
Ms. Robinson, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you tell us, ma'am, what are some of the primary concerns of this particular region that your office is focusing on or that has been brought to your office's attention?
Well, first of all, it's a very important region because of the very large population and the very real needs and concerns. And so I have been very pleased that India is hosting this year a workshop for the Asia-Pacific region in which we have 29 countries and 6 national commissions for human rights and non-governmental organizations coming together to discuss a regional framework of making progress in 4 areas: in human rights education, national human rights institutions, national plans for human rights, and also a very important whole area for the Asia-Pacific region: economic and social rights and cultural rights and the right to development.
Right. And how have you found the response? For example, the Indian government's response. I believe you met our Prime Minister today. Did you find him, by and large, sort of responsive to the suggestions that are being put forward by you?
Yes, I had a very good and very serious and constructive discussion with the Prime Minister, and I think it is very important that there is a recognition that human rights as a whole are taking a new shape in our modern world, that it is very important for countries like India to have a very strong approach that is there in the Constitution, there in the tradition and laws of India, but also needs to be reaffirmed in the modern context of an India which has to address and look at issues of problem, be it problems of the northeastern part of the country where the Special Powers Act has been in force for a very long time, where the Human Rights Committee has been expressing concern, and these are concerns that I have expressed to the Prime Minister, and we have discussed that, or whether it is ethnic conflict issues. Again, these are issues that are of concern in an overall context of a commitment which is very strong to the protection and promotion of human rights.
One of the points that you just mentioned, the ethnic conflict, for instance, is something that has been widely discussed here in India, and it's also something in which our own Human Rights Commission has tried to sort of intervene and make suggestions, but without too great a response or too great an effect. Is there anything that your office or yourself would be doing or could suggest to perhaps strengthen the work that our own Human Rights Commission is doing here?
Well, I am certainly aware of and very appreciative of the work of the Indian National Human Rights Commission. It is a very strong Human Rights Commission in a comparative context. It is a role model for such commissions. I'm also aware of the role of the Special Rapporteur on Religious Intolerance and his communications, and I think the important issue is to address and to promote the importance of eliminating religious intolerance, promoting tolerance, and insofar as my office can help and support through education, through other ways, we will support both the National Human Rights Commission and also the Government of India.
Right. Ms. Robertson, in terms of the current discourse on human rights, there's a sort of growing shift, at least as far as India is concerned. The focus is more on development-linked issues, whether it's health or education or women's rights. In that context, how do you see your own office performing a distinct role from other UN agencies, like, say, which have a greater focus on development? How do you see the distinction?
Well, I see it as being very important, certainly to me personally, as High Commissioner, and I think to my mandate, that I would have an approach that is very balanced, that recognises that we need to be strong both on civil and political rights, but also on economic, social and cultural rights and the right to development. And the Secretary-General, Kofi Annan, also very strongly supports this approach, and he has given me as High Commissioner a particular role of integrating human rights into the 4 executive committees and throughout the work of other agencies and programs of the UN. So how does this work? For example, in development, we participate on the executive committee in New York on development issues. We look at the guidelines for the United Nations Development Assistance Framework, the UNDAF program. We chair a subcommittee on right to development, which involves all the big agencies such as UNDP, UNICEF, UNFPA, and we are looking together at how we have a human rights dimension, a right to development approach, a rights-based approach to development. And I think that this is a new shaping of a human rights debate. And why does it matter? Because millions of people were left out of the human rights debate. Millions of people living in absolute poverty, who had no security of right to food, right to education, and these are I think the issues that right to health care, children dying because of lack of access to safe water. Right. These are human rights issues that must be much more in the forefront of our minds.
In terms of your own experience, since the time you've been working as the UN Human Rights Commissioner, how responsive have you found governments across the world to the suggestions you make? There are a number of flashpoints across the world that still exist, whether it's Africa or Afghanistan. Are governments, by and large, responsible to the sort of suggestions and the advocacy done by the Human Rights Commission? I
think, yes, that there is an approach which I welcome of having more of a balance. It was reflected in the last Commission on Human Rights, the Intergovernmental Commission, which proposed new mandates. The mandate on right to development, which Dr. Sengupta, who is taking part in our workshop, is the rapporteur of, an expert on extreme poverty, on debt-related issues, on education, and that is a good sign. Also, as High Commissioner, I take the approach to all governments, which is objective and I think the fair approach that all governments have human rights problems. There are some governments in the past who thought it was only other countries who had human rights problems. But when you look in a broad way at human rights issues, then all countries have problems, which means that there is a need to have a culture of addressing those problems and a reshaping of our whole debate on human rights that is perhaps more respectful and addresses the real issues. And those real issues primarily affect those who don't even know they have rights, don't even know that there is a language of human rights that is for them, and for them to know about, to participate in, to have access to, and that it should make a difference.